And we're looking at the book of Proverbs. We're going through and sort of taking snapshots, different places. And the key with the book of Proverbs is to learn to walk with wisdom. And every one of us needs wisdom. I'm convinced that if we get enough wisdom, then it may spill out into Washington, D.C. And it may spill out into the world. And maybe the promise of God, I think it will anyway, that the knowledge of God will cover the earth like the water covers the sea. But how great that would come from the church, wouldn't it be? And for me and you, we are the church. One of the more difficult ones is what we're looking at today, particularly in the world that we live in. In Proverbs 16:32, it says, "Whoever slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city." We live in a land of self-expression. I've got the right to be angry. I've got the right to say what's on my mind, and we express this, and anger flares up everywhere, doesn't it? You cannot talk to someone anymore that disagrees with you without being a hater on one side or the other. And the Bible speaks to that very clearly, and this is one of the places where it speaks to it. It speaks to it with ruling your spirit. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. You know something? It's hard to be mighty. You put this up there, whoever slow to anger is better than the mighty. David had 30 mighty men, and these were guys that went down in snowy pits to kill a lion. They didn't just walk by. There are guys that killed an Egyptian with his own spear. These were mighty men. And what Solomon, David's son, is saying at this point is, you want to know somebody that's mightier than that? Look at somebody that's slow to anger. And then if you want to see something even greater than that, one of the hardest things to do in the ancient world was to lay siege to a city. When you laid siege to a city, what you did is you got a bunch of rubble and you piled it up and you tried to breach the walls and get to it. The whole time you're doing that, what do you think the people in the city are doing? Yeah, they're throwing stuff at you, they're shooting stuff at you, they're doing whatever they can to keep you from it. The sheer mass of people that it takes to take a city was remarkable. And the amount of time when they laid siege to Jerusalem, it was over 9 months before they got a breach through the wall. And Solomon's saying at this point, he who rules his spirit is better than the one who takes a city. He's laying a strong comparison here, and it's one that I think we need to embrace as well. And the first question I think we need to ask is, why do I need self-control? I know, you shouldn't have to ask this, but we live in a time where people don't feel they need it. They can express and say whatever they want and forget the consequences. That's your problem. And the Bible makes it clear, I think, that we need self-control because we've got some enemies in our life that will absolutely take us down. According to the Bible, and this isn't in your paper, you can write it down if you want. 2 of them are, the third one isn't. We have 3 enemies. You, as a follower of Jesus Christ, have 3 enemies, period. The first one is the world. The second one is the flesh. And the third one is the devil. The world, the flesh, the devil. Those are your 3 enemies as a follower of Jesus Christ. We need self-control because of our flesh. Our flesh, and by that I don't mean our flesh and blood like this. There are people who take it literally. In the early church, there were some ascetic Christians that what they do is do things like wear burlap underwear to sort of mess with their body, to bring the flesh into submission. They miss the point. The problem isn't this flesh here. As a matter of fact, we're going to get a new body one day. The problem isn't the external coating. The problem isn't that we're human. The problem is what we've done to our humanity. And what we've inherited that's been done wrong with our humanity. The problem is sin that lives in us. Sin lives in us, and we looked at this a couple of weeks ago, but in James chapter 1, it says, each person is tempted when they are dragged away by what? their own evil desire. And then he goes on, he talks about the consequences of that. And he goes, and after desire is conceived, he gives birth to sin. Sin, when it's full grown, gives birth to death. He's laying out the procession here. And the thing that we need to understand is we come into this world corrupted in our nature. We come into the world wanting things that are bad for us. We come into the world with a skewed set of values, and even skewed set of way to get things that are good. We come in with that. And so one of the places that we need to really exercise self-control, one reason we need it, is because if we don't exercise self-control for those forces, the force of evil that works in us, what's going to happen? It's going to come out. And it will bring us to ruin. As a matter of fact, in Galatians chapter 5, Paul writing to Christians, not to ones that are not believers, but to those who are Christians, says this, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desire of the flesh. For the flesh desires what is contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what's contrary to the flesh." They're in conflict with each other, so that you are not to do whatever you want. We've got the flesh in us, that's that sinful tendencies and principles that live there, that we've got years maybe of habit of listening to. And we have the principle of new life in us that's there by the Holy Spirit. And according to God, they're at war with one another. And truthfully, the one you listen to is going to end up having greater dominion in your life. And if you don't exercise self-control, it's like my natural area in my front yard. You know what's in my natural area since this happened? Gee. And so, of course, I go out the other day and I spray, and I'm just sitting here going, they're everywhere. And 30 minutes later, it rains. So I go out and spray again. But if we don't exercise self-control, those weeds that are planted in our lives are going to choke us. And not just us, they're going to grow in us, and what are they going to do to the people around us? They're going to kill them. It's going to affect others too. We need self-control because we have a principle of death in us, as well as a principle of life in following Christ. So we need to exercise self-control. The second enemy that's out there is the world. The world. Any of you not moved by external influences? You know what you call somebody that says they're not moved by external influences? What? A liar. That's what you call them. Because all of us are. And I'll tell you how that works. I grew up in a time when everybody was extremely liberal and anti-military post-Vietnam. And whereas I think the world affected them because of the rhetoric that was going on in the media there, I grew up on the other end of it, and I was affected by it because I was reacting to it. It wasn't that this was who I was, it was the world influencing me in one way or the other. You understand what I mean? We're either reacting to it or falling in line with it so many times. It sets the agenda. Too many times in our lives, the world sets the agenda. And who's supposed to set the agenda in our life? God, right, Christ. And if the world is so busy setting the agenda, it's an enemy. We're following down its path. We're following down its path. And so we need to be careful with that. If we listen to that and the things going on in the world and the arguments and the tapes that are being played there, we're going to be fruitless in this world. As a matter of fact, in Mark chapter 4, in the parable of the soils, where Jesus lays out 4 types of soils, the one I think is almost the most pitiful, but could almost be descriptive of some people in the church and some believers, is that third type of soil. And he goes, that type of soil is this. Still others, like seed growing among thorns, hear the word. They hear it, they take it in, but then the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, desire for other things come in and choke the word and make it unfruitful. This is the world setting the agenda. And if you let the world set the agenda, the world tells me that I've got to have certain name brands and stuff. The world tells me that I've got to live in a certain type of house. And the world, you know what? I've got in my kitchen Formica countertops. You remember what those are? Nobody has those anymore. And you know one of the biggest, it's a few people do, a few of us do. One of the biggest, there's nothing the matter with quartz and recycled glass and granite and all that. Those are fine. But it's the desire for that can plant stuff in us that makes us buy into a whole system of things that's just, I'm going to let everybody else set my values. And I've got these Formica countertops in my house, and I want to update my house, and then there's an internal battle going, I'm not going to do it. I'm not buying into this. And who's setting my agenda? The world. It can happen and make you unfruitful. In the smallest things, and Formica countertops are small. But what about your sex life? What about how you spend your money? And how you spend your time? Those are big deals. And too often the world sets our agenda there. And we need self-control, because if we just sort of live without paying attention to it, those things seep in and they lead us down their path. That's exactly what they do. John puts it a little more plainly in 1 John 2. He goes, do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father's not in them. For everything in the world, he's not talking about the physical world. Who created the physical world? He did, right? He's talking about the things that are against his will. For everything in the world, and he describes it here, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, comes not from the Father, but from the world. We need self-control, and then you add to that the devil, and I think the devil works through the world, and he works through your own sinful tendencies to lead you astray. All those things will lead you to death. And we need self-control, because I don't think anybody here wants to be unfruitful for God. They don't want somebody doing their funeral going, I don't know if they were a Christian. They made this profession, but I just never saw any. I don't know. And you don't want to be the one that their daughter or their son looks at them and goes, I want to be a Christian, but I don't want to be one like him or her. I want to really follow Jesus. So in order to do that, we've got to have self-control, and we need to deal with the question, how do I rule my spirit? How do I control my anger? How do I do that? I'm going to lay 4 things out there. I'm going to do it fairly quickly. There are 4 key things, and it's not a formula. If you will not get a sermon from me that's step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, it's done, go, do it, leave. Because life isn't that easy. And the enemy is that smart. The thing about the viruses that are out there now is they're smart and they sort of adapt. Well, the enemy's much smarter than the virus. But if we try a formula, he's just going to adapt. And these 4 principles will absolutely help you rule your spirit. The first one, friends, remember the cross. You know the difference between self-discipline and self-control for a believer? Anybody can do self-discipline. I read something about Mike Tyson talking about how he trained, and what he said is, I do the things that I hate to do and act like I love them. I do them like I love them. Well, that's self-discipline. Anybody can do that. Muhammad Ali said, I never counted push-ups, or sit-ups. I never counted the sit-ups I did until I got to the point when they hurt, and I started counting them then. That's self-discipline. That's great, that's laudable, but that's not self-control. Self-control starts with the cross. It starts with looking to Jesus and realizing that Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane had it out. He did not have to die. He did not have to. As a matter of fact, he said he could have called his Father, right? And the Father would have sent legions of angels to rescue him. He didn't have to. in the Garden of Gethsemane, he was wrestling with what he wanted to do and what the Father wanted him to do, and he was bringing them together. And what happened is he ended up spilling his blood for you, willingly, because of who he was. And when I look and I understand the first step in self-control, to me, is remembering the cross and looking at Jesus and going, Jesus, you did this for me. You spilled your blood for me. And I'm not going to change what I watch on TV for you. Forget that. I'm following you. You've done more for me than TV ever will do for me, this program that I'm watching. Look to the cross. That's my motivation. That's my heart. In 1 Peter 2:24, we're reminded he himself bore our sins in his body on the cross that we might die to sin and live to righteousness. It's by his stripes we're healed. It's not by your self-discipline you're healed. It's by his stripes you're healed. You look to the cross. And the beauty when you look to the cross as well is you realize that if you're in Jesus Christ, you are forgiven. Like Steve Brown said, go out and play, but this time you play the right way. You don't go stop up drains. You go play the right way. You listen to the right voice. And you look to the cross. The motivation has to be Jesus Christ. The second thing is, dig in for the fight. You know the thing when you conquer a city? When you finish conquering it, what's happened? It's conquered. But when you are battling your flesh and you're trying to restrain your anger, those two things, when you win the battle in that one incident, the war's still going. And we need to realize that this is long-term and you dig in for the fight. One of the worst experiences I had in Ranger training was in Florida, up near Eglin Air Force Base, and we're doing a 12-day patrol. And at one point, I got a leadership position. When you get a leadership position, they're grading you. You've got to pass so many of them or you don't become a ranger. And I got this one, and we had a guy that was a jerk for our evaluator. And I did a good job at what I was doing, but our company guy did not, and he failed everybody. And so what happens is that was a 24-hour leadership position. The leadership positions are 24 hours. No sleep, you're running around like that, and the pressure's on. And at 6 something in the morning, they let you start a little fire. We throw our can back then. There were cans of sea rations in the fire, get it warm because it was freezing. It's like January. We start eating it. And then they call you in for evaluation and call new leaders. So they evaluated us, told us we failed. I went back through my can in the fire, and they called my name again. 2 days in a row. And so I went, and we'd go all that day, and at 3 in the morning, we got into our position where we're supposed to be. And the great thing about that was 3 hours sleep I was going to get. And the guy goes, B-52 strike is going to be occurring, you need to dig in. I'm like, foxholes. At 3 in the morning, we're digging foxholes. Have you ever dug in sand? What happens when you dig in sand? You dig in the sand all the time. I mean, it takes 3 times the amount of time to dig. So we're digging. I go up to the guy, and I realize we're not going to do this in 3 hours. I go, how deep do they have to be? And he goes above the knee. Great. I go and get that done, got clearance, and I went, boom. We had to dig in for the fight. It wasn't done until you dig in. We need to realize when we are battling this, when we are trying to exercise self-control and gain that, it's a long-term fight. It's long-term. Mine was 24 hours. I knew it was over after that. The one we've got's a lifetime. Dig in for the fight. Realize it's going to happen and prepare for it. In Romans 8:13, Paul writes, if you live according to the flesh, you'll die, but if by the Spirit you put to death the misdeeds of the body, you'll live. It's a day in, day out thing. Those are continuous action verbs. Colossians 3 again. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. If you ever wrestle with lust, Have you ever wrestled with that? How many times does it hit you? Just once? How many times? Every weak moment you have. Every time when you've battled it a long time, if you've ever done addiction, you've battled it a long time, you're doing well, you go, I deserve a break. And right then a person comes in and gives you a break. That's what happens. You got to dig in for the long haul because these things do not hit you just once and leave. When I was dealing with pornography, the thing that helped me get through it, one of the things from God that helped me get through it, was a Bible verse, how shall a young man keep his way pure? By keeping it according to your word. I'd have to find a new verse now because I'm not young. But there it was. There it was. And when those things hit me and it was unexpected, my mind went to that verse. It was like, and it helped. I was digging in for the fight. And that's what we have to do. The third thing we do, and this is one that is counterintuitive. When we have stuff going on in us, who do we want to know about it? Nobody. Because I'd be ashamed if you knew this. And the opposite of that is we've got to bring it to the light. The enemy wants you to keep those temptations and those things you struggle with deep in the darkness, because in the darkness he wins. But what we need to do is take that, and we don't come up in church and broadcast it to everybody, because there are people here that don't know you and love you and have the discretion that you need. And there are people here that may be wrestling with the same thing, and Satan looks and goes, I'll match you up. Not in a healthy way. But God gives us trusted friends or leaders that we can share our struggles with and who can help us be accountable in a healthy sense. Not to beat us up, but to walk with us through it. That's exactly what we need. When you bring it to the light, you know who loses? The devil. Absolutely. And when we bring it to the light, it also makes us have to deal with it because somebody else knows. And so we bring it to the light. And in James 5, it says, confess your sins to each other and pray for one another that you may be healed. You want to be healed from something inside that's leading you down the path of death, you need to confess it to somebody that you trust. And if there's no one you trust, that's another issue to work with. But that's why there's leadership in a church. And you pray for one another that you may be healed. And I love it, Jesus, and of course I love Jesus, but in John 3, he goes, this is the verdict. Light's come into the world, but people love darkness instead of light. Why? Because their deeds were evil. Everyone who does evil hates the light, will not come to the light for fear that their deeds will be exposed. But whoever lives by the truth comes into the light so that it may be seen plainly that what they have done has been done in the sight of God. In other words, you know what? I have no problem telling you before I struggled with pornography. But God helped me through that. God is the one who brought victory. And now there's an accountability because you know where I've been. When I bring it to the light, the enemy doesn't have a tool to beat me up with shame and guilt. He does not. Because it's been dealt with at the cross. It's been dealt with. When I bring something to the light, Jesus can heal it. When I keep it into the dark, the enemy can use it. That's exactly what happens. And then the last one is obvious. Pray. And there may be times you plead with God. And go, God, help me with this area. Help me with this right now. Please, God, help me with this. Jesus, talking to the disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane, said this. What did he tell them? Pray. Watch and pray. Watch and pray. That's what you've got to do. You've got to watch your life and you've got to pray. You've got to watch and pray. The Spirit's willing. We know that. That's why you're here. But he's a realist. He goes, the flesh is weak. That's why we need God, isn't it? That's why we need one another. The gospel is not self-discipline. Anybody can have self-discipline. Self-control is from the gospel. The reason being, the motivation of it is the cross of Jesus. The goal of it isn't my perfection. The goal of it is his glory. That's the goal of it. You know what? I think we have a choice. And truthfully, I think the choice is this simple. We live in captivity to the things that are in us and to the things around us. Or we live as conquerors through Him who loved us. That's the issue with self-control. That's the issue. We're going to live life by the gospel, or we're going to live life by the flesh.